Hello, everyone. Welcome. Shana and I are doing a quick training, and this training is titled Paperwork for Onboarding New and Continuing AmeriCorps Members. So when you are enrolling your new AmeriCorps members, you site supervisors will go through all of the paperwork to help your member enroll. The paperwork is a really important part of enrolling your AmeriCorps members. It needs to be done before we can actually enroll them. And we'll talk a little bit about this, but sometimes with the background checks, it does take a little bit longer. So it's important as soon as you have recruited that new AmeriCorps member that you get the paperwork and have them start filling that out as soon as possible. We also will go through what continuing AmeriCorps members need to do in terms of paperwork, and that'll be in the later slides. So first off, we have two separate sets of paperwork. We have what is called the administrative paperwork. So it starts out with the authorization for a direct deposit. We have an I-9 form, which verifies their citizenship and ability to work in the United States. We have a federal W-4, and we also have a state of Wisconsin W-4 that we need members to fill out as well. Before we can do this, there is a Google form that many of you are aware of, which Shana and I send you. It's entitled Information Needed to Enroll New AmeriCorps Members. This form must be completed first. This will give us the basic information about your new AmeriCorps member that we will need to get some of the background checks going and setting up payroll and some of that behind the scenes stuff. So the Google form needs to be completed first, as you see up there. And then we have the four forms that are included with the administrative paperwork. Members must complete the AmeriCorps application, which is located in their My AmeriCorps portal. And they also need to sign a member service agreement as well, which will be emailed to each member through DocuSign. So the first step, the AmeriCorps member needs to fill out their AmeriCorps application. Then we receive that application. And once we do that, we can get the member service agreement going with the member's information and send that out to them through DocuSign. So a quick recap of the administrative paperwork. We have the Google form, information needed to enroll new AmeriCorps members, which will be completed and sent to Shana and I. We have the authorization for a direct deposit, the I-9 form, the federal W-4, and the state of Wisconsin W-4, and the AmeriCorps application that the member completes when they create their AmeriCorps account, and the member service agreement that is sent to the member through DocuSign. So that is the administrative paperwork. The one thing I will say, oftentimes when we're reviewing this paperwork, many of the mistakes are made when filling out the I-9 form, and mainly because this is the form where you have to physically examine the new AmeriCorps member's ID. So it can either be a passport, a social security card, or a combination of a social security card and a driver's license. So site supervisors have to physically examine and look at whatever documentation and government ID they're using for that I-9. And then you have to write down on that page 2 of the I-9 what government IDs that you're using to verify that person for employment. The second category for the background checks is the second section for the paperwork is the background check paperwork. And over the years, we have really skimmed back on what those forms include. The background check paperwork just includes 4 forms. As you see here, the first one is the WAHRS background check consent form. That is basically letting the AmeriCorps member know, giving us the consent to run these checks. The bid disclosure form, the Department of Justice privacy statement, and the Department of Justice waiver agreement. So these 4 forms, when the new AmeriCorps member completes them, basically gives us WAHRS the go-ahead to start running these background checks. So WAHRS recommends that site supervisors work alongside their members when completing all the onboarding paperwork, as I mentioned before, especially when it comes to completing the I-9 form. Site supervisors need to physically examine the IDs that they're using. Site supervisors do not need to send copies of member IDs used to verify their employment for the I-9. Some site supervisors and programs will send a copy of the new member's driver's license or social security card. You don't need to do that. You don't need to send those copies of IDs to us. But WAHRS asks that you do keep a copy of American members' IDs on file at your host site or service site. American members must use their legal name when completing all of their paperwork. So this is really important, especially when we run background checks, because if a member uses a different name and not their legal name or one that appears on their government ID, the background check is not void. So just make sure that when you're sitting down with your new American member, when they are putting their name on any of these forms, that they look at their ID and they use their legal name for all of this paperwork. And just a reminder to just discard, if you have any old WAHRS paperwork hanging around that you've had over the years, just make sure that you're discarding of that old WAHRS paperwork. We've updated a lot of this paperwork, especially the I-9 and the W-2s need to be updated every year because they send new ones out. So if you have any old paperwork that you just use for them to fill out, please disregard that and delete it, and we'll send you all new paperwork when it's time to enroll your new member. I'm just moving on to the background check. As I said before, we just have slimmed these down to the 4 forms that you need your new American members to complete so we can start the background checks. Again, using their legal name as it appears on the government ID is key for these background checks. Once we have these 4 forms, we can start initiating the check. As many of you know, the field print check can be initiated by the AmeriCorps member. We will send those instructions out in terms of how to create an account and reach out and schedule the fingerprint scan. But field print is something that once we get these 4 forms back, I will be sending your new AmeriCorps member instructions for how to do their field print, and they take it from there. So they can initiate field print as soon as we get these forms signed. The true screen check is something that we need to do, and it's something that WAHRS needs to initiate. So, Shana, do you want to add anything about new American member background checks before we move on to the continuing members?
No, I think that's good. You covered it.
Okay.
And again, if you get stuck on any of this, Tim and I are always here to help. So just don't worry about reaching out at any time, and we'll get it figured out.
So I know we have quite a few continuing members that are continuing on with WAHRS at your host sites, which is a great thing. And fortunate for those continuing members and those site supervisors, the continuing AmeriCorps members do not have to redo any of the paperwork. So when we talk about the administrative paperwork, those 4 forms, as well as the background check, none of that needs to be redone. I will say that if you look at the bottom here, continuing members do not need to complete new background checks. However, if a member has a gap of service of more than 180 days between their terms of service, or we have a member who is working with a different program, that they switch programs but are still WAHRS AmeriCorps members, then we would need them to do a different background check. The likelihood of having a continuing member who has a gap of 180 days is fairly slim, so I don't think that will happen. But an example of that, I do get some questions on this, is if you have a member who for some reason gets all their service hours in early on in their first term, and then they sort of are done, and then they don't start their second term for 180 days, which is, like I said, fairly unlikely, but that would be a situation where if 180 days have passed from their first to second term, we would have to redo that paperwork. But 98% of all of you continuing members will not need to do that paperwork over again. However, continuing members must do a new member service agreement on DocuSign. We will have to update the dates, and the living allowance and the education award often change from year to year. So those new member service agreements will reflect all those changes. So continuing members will need to, excuse me, complete a new member service agreement, and we will send that out to you through DocuSign. And as well as continuing members also need to resubmit and post their AmeriCorps application in the AmeriCorps portal. You don't have to redo your application. You basically just have to resubmit and post it. So how you would do that for continuing members is that you would log into your My AmeriCorps portal. You would go to your AmeriCorps application, and you would submit it and then post it to WAHRS. So we have your updated application. If any of your information has changed from your first term to your second term, like let's say you moved to a different address, or you have a different email address, obviously you would go and update all of that new information on your AmeriCorps application before you submitted it and posted it for your second term. But if nothing has changed, all you need to do is log back in and resubmit and post your application, so we have a new one for each term of service. So
and
for
Tim
continuing
and I will
members,
send out, Tim and I will send out an email step-by-step on how continuing members can do that. So it's nothing site supervisors need to do.
So continuing members, pretty simple, just those two things. And like Shana said, if you guys have any questions, please reach out to us. We will be sending each site supervisor a folder with all of the background check forms in it. So when we get word that you have a new member, the background check and the app and the administrative paperwork, we will be sending you that in a folder. So hopefully it'll be a little bit easier. You can just open that folder and have all the forms there. And whatever the preferences that each of you have for returning that paperwork to us, usually most folks scan that paperwork in and send it to us. That works out. Just double check that when you do scan the completed paperwork back to us, that it's all there. Sometimes there's sheets missing, or you're using a big copier to scan that stuff. So just recheck that all the paperwork is there and signed and dated, and whatever way works best for all of you to send that to us is fine.
All right, thank you.